classic movie. Now, MICHEAUX survived in a world where he was confined merely to making what are called the race films. Lee survived in a world which changed significantly. And to compare them, to talk honestly about them, I want to say a few things, just a few things before closing, about the differences of the worlds in which they work. Because again, that'll help us understand MICHEAUX and Lee. The race film industry, of which MICHEAUX eventually became the leader and a major figure, actually began in reaction to D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. On March 3rd, 1915, in Manhattan, hooded figures wearing the robes of the Ku Klux Klan rode through the streets, advertising the opening of Birth of a Nation. And those of you who've seen Birth of a Nation know that it's a paean, it's a hymn to the Ku Klux Klan. Birth of a Nation became Hollywood's first blockbuster hit. It ran for over a year in New York. The fact that you would have Klansmen, Klan-like figures riding through the streets of Manhattan advertising it tells you something about the climate of the times, but those were the times. And the race film industry began in reaction to Birth of a Nation. So MICHEAUX then survived in a very different climate than the one in which Lee worked. He was shut out of Hollywood. Indeed, in the early 20s, you had white actors in blackface who played black roles. So MICHEAUX was shut out of Hollywood. They would not have hired him for any job behind the camera except perhaps pushing a broom. So there was no way then in which he could pursue a career in Hollywood. So he worked outside the system, and in a really heroic manner, but he survived outside the system. Lee, on the other hand, confronted a very different Hollywood, in a very different world. And in the world in which Lee started, if a small independent filmmaker could find a distributor, his film might find an audience. And if his film found an audience large enough and made money, he might attract the interest of the studios. And if he attracted the interest of the studios, they might provide millions for his next film. And that roughly is the trajectory of Lee's career. What made it unusual is that he was a young black striving to break through as a director, and that his breakthrough film, She's Gotta Have It, reflected a world and sensibilities foreign to Hollywood. We might say something about that later in Q&A, about She's Gotta Have It. And so absolute racial bars had disappeared by the time Lee came along. In other words, you did not have the absolute segregation of MICHEAUX's era. What Lee confronted was very different. It was the question of whether he could maintain his artistic integrity, whether he could put on screen something that represented his vision. And as I've said, the struggle with, in terms of do the right thing, reflects that, that tension in his